It's your Friday News Buzz edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. Next, a recent conversation, actually from yesterday, that I had with Nina Elkadi, a native Iowan and an investigative reporter now for Sentient Media. We discussed her deeply troubling investigation into Seaboard Triumph Foods in Sioux City. And through some brave whistleblowing of a former employee there, Steven Barrows, and extensive documentation, Nina has exposed a pattern of environmental violations, worker safety issues, and regulatory failures at one of Iowa's largest pork processing facilities. Nina Elkadi, welcome back to our program.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Nina, this story raises so many critical questions about corporate accountability, environmental justice, and the true cost of industrial agriculture in our state. How did Steven Barrows, the whistleblower in this case, reach out to you, and what convinced you this story was worth investigating?
Yeah, Ben. Well, Steven Barrows actually, upon leaving Seaboard Triumph Foods, where he was working for approximately 5 years, he submitted a tip to the Environmental Protection Agency, calling out some of those things that you listed in the beginning of the show. And I actually found his tip and reached out to him. And he was willing to chat, thankfully, and share his experiences of working there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If you go to look at your article, I don't know, the best way to find your work here is, Nina?
It's probably by going to my website, ninaelkadi.com, last name Elkadi.
Okay. I'm looking at your article here at an Iowa pork plant, piles of dead pigs and wafting sulfur dioxide. Here we do have this pile of dead pigs. This produces a toxic gas. Tell us what the crux of what you uncovered is and what the big problem here is in terms of the environment.
So, as you mentioned, there are kind of a couple different things going on. I would say one of the biggest things regarding the environment is that Seaboard Triumph Foods has been emitting that gas that you named, sulfur dioxide, into the atmosphere, into Sioux City. There are so many specifics we could go down about that gas, but the main thing to know is that they were emitting levels so high, too high, for approximately 2,000 hours. On top of that, there was another gas being produced inside of the facility. And on top of that, as Steven shared with EPA and with me in our talks, there were piles of dead hogs throughout the facility and outside of the facility.
And these gases, this toxic gas is being produced by the decomposing corpses of the pigs?
Yeah. So there are certain processes in quote unquote anaerobic digestion where slaughterhouses, CAFOs can take bodies or manure of animals and allow them to decompose, sometimes to create biogas or other things that might be quote unquote climate smart solutions to some of these huge industrialized agricultural problems. So likely these gases were being created in the process of flaring methane gas inside of the facility.
Mm-hmm. Steve Barrows, the whistleblower you had as a main contact for this investigation, worked there for 5 years. We had a real toll on his health from this. He was also blacklisted as a troublemaker for raising safety concerns, right?
Yeah, so some of the things that he shared with me were that he was constantly coughing and hacking after a shift at the plant. You know, these gases really should not be inhaled at all. They should especially not be inhaled without proper protective equipment. According to Steven in my conversations with him, he raised these issues to his supervisors at the plant who did not act accordingly.
Mm-hmm. What does this story reveal about the true environmental cost of Iowa's massive pork industry? And I like to, just so we can grasp it, the idea that there are, roughly 3 million people here in Iowa, but there are 7 times the number of hogs and pigs at any one time as humans in our state. We never see them. But what did it reveal about the true environmental cost here to you?
Well, this plant alone produces, or rather, slaughters and produces approximately 20,000 hogs per day. And this is just one plant in Iowa, given, it is one of the biggest plants, but there are so many things happening behind closed doors that we don't know about. This is just one instance that we do know about. So it's really hard to get a sense of what's happening across the state without people like Steven coming forward, which is why, I'm really grateful for him for sharing this story.
Yeah. You mentioned in your article the undocumented workers maybe being afraid to speak up about the health issues. But aside from that, what was it like trying to get responses from the company, Seaboard Triumph, the Iowa DNR, other official agencies on this story? What did you find out there from them?
Well, since he did submit a complaint, a couple agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, they did respond to me saying that they had received the complaint, but were not allowed to comment on it. And I did not hear back from Seaboard Triumph Foods or DNR with regards to this story.
Hmm. We want to make sure that listeners know that you did verify Steven Barrows' claims. So talk about that quickly, the process. How did you cross-reference his documentation, and what were the main claims he made that we should keep in mind?
Sure. So there were a lot of photos and videos that Stephen provided to document his experiences in the plant. And there are a lot of geolocating tools that you can use to verify those photos and videos. And then, obviously, of course, verifying that he himself worked in that plant. But with any investigation, half the battle is ensuring that your story is airtight. And what Stephen was saying, to the best of our knowledge, was accurate and representative of his time there.
Hmm. This article has been out at least a couple of weeks, if not a little bit longer here. What's been the reaction to that? Any repercussions?
Well, I have heard from some other employees within the plant, and I think the best thing to say here is to stay tuned. There are some follow-ups in the works regarding Seaboard Triumph Foods in this story.
Okay, we'll look for those now. Sioux City, and you bring this out in your article, has been a meatpacking town since way back in the late 1800s. Tell us a little bit about that and how residents today view these environmental and health trade-offs. You note that Sioux City used to be called Sewer City because of the smell, right?
Yeah, and I am really interested in how current residents are reacting to work that I put out about their communities. And apparently, sewer city is a term that is still used to describe Sioux City because of the smell created by plants like this. And as you said, it's complicated. It's important to note that often meat packers are the biggest employer in a community, and
Mm-hmm.
they can have a lot of influence over the town and also maybe do a lot of good, right? They can fund stadiums, fund other programs. So I think for workers in a lot of these facilities, it's a really careful line of speaking truth to your experience and also not wanting to jeopardize, your job or your neighbors' jobs.
Nina, you are someone who splits time between your home state, Iowa, and Washington, D.C., where we find you today. How do you see this story fitting into larger conversations about industrial agriculture here in Iowa?
I think the biggest thing that I see with regards to the story is a question of regulation or not. With Seaboard Triumph Foods, they had been emitting this gas for so long, and they were ultimately fined $7,000, which maybe to an everyday person is a lot of money, but to a large corporation is barely a slap on the wrist. So it fits into a broad picture for me of all of these conversations, even you and I have had before about whether or not things are regulated properly in the state and in the country.
Nina Elkadi is an investigative reporter for Sentient Media, a nonprofit news. She focuses on factory farms, their effects on climate, animals, workers, clean water, public health, and rural communities. So much important work Nina is doing. And Nina, say once again, how can we find your work?
You can find my work on my website, ninaelkadi.com, Elkadi.
Until next time, we'll follow up for sure, Nina. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.